20 years, that's a lifetime. It's long enough to build a company from a shared dream in a damp garage into a gleaming beacon of the tech industry. It's long enough for two young men, fueled by cheap coffee and a fanatical belief in a few lines of code, to become titans. It's long enough for a friendship to become a brotherhood, a bond forged in the fires of all-night coding sessions, near bankruptcies, and the eventual dizzying taste of success. His name and my name were once inseparable, a single entity in the minds of our investors and our peers. We were the perfect team. I was the architect, the creator. My world was the silent, elegant dance of logic on a screen, the building of systems so complex and beautiful they were like poetry to me. He was the voice, the face, the charismatic visionary who could sell our poetry to a world that only understood profit and loss. I trusted him. It wasn't even a conscious thought. It was a fundamental law of my universe, as certain as gravity. I trusted him with the code, with the company, with my future, with my family's well-being. I trusted him with the finances, an area I found tedious and distracting. While I built the engine, he steered the ship, managing our income, our investments, our burn rate, all the messy, real-world details that made my digital creations possible. And for 20 years, the ship sailed on a golden sea. Our startup became the success story everyone wants to write. We went from ramen noodles to Michelin stars, from a cramped apartment to sprawling homes in gated communities. My wife, who had stood by me during the lean years, blossomed in our newfound wealth. Our life became a curated collection of beautiful things. The minimalist house with infinity pool, the European cars, the private schools for our two children. We had it all and it felt earned, the righteous reward for 2 decades of relentless work. I never paid close attention to the fine print. When he would slide a stack of documents across the polished boardroom table, I would sign where he pointed. Loan agreements, share allocations, quarterly reports, it was all just noise to me. My focus was on the next product iteration, the next breakthrough. My risk management was my partner. His calm, confident smile was all the insurance I ever needed. The first tremor was so small I barely registered it. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I needed access to our main cloud accounting platform to pull some performance metrics for a technical report. My login was denied. I figured it was a glitch, an expired password. I walked down the hall to his office, a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city. He wasn't there. His assistant, a young woman who was always a little too nervous around me, said he was in an off-site meeting. He'd been in a lot of those lately. When I asked her about the login, she paled and stammered something about a system-wide security update. It felt wrong, but to suspect him would have been to suspect myself. We were two halves of the same whole, so I let it go. The next day, the real earthquake hit. It didn't come with a warning. It came as a phone call from the chief counsel of our largest investor, a man whose voice I had only ever heard during celebratory champagne toasts. His tone was not celebratory. It was cold, hard, and laced with a fury that chilled me to the bone. He spoke of leveraged assets, of defaulted loans taken out against the company's shares, of covenants being breached. He was speaking a language I didn't understand. He kept saying, "you," as in the debt you have incurred, the assets you have liquidated. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I assured him it was a mistake, a misunderstanding I would clear up immediately. I hung up and tried to call my partner. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried his cell, his home number, his wife's number. Nothing. A cold, metallic fear began to seep into my veins. I raced to his office. It was empty, not just of him, but of everything personal. The family photos on his desk were gone. The awards we had won together were gone. The only thing left on his desk was a single, plain white envelope with my name on it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely tear it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a single piece of paper, a printout of a bank transfer confirmation. A transfer of an 8-figure sum from our corporate reserve account, our rainy day fund, our future, to an untraceable account in a country I'd never heard of. The date on the transfer was from 3 weeks ago. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back to my office, my legs unsteady, and used my master admin credentials to force my way into the system. What I found was a digital graveyard, a carefully, systematically, and ruthlessly executed demolition of our life's work. Over the past 6 months, he had been creating a labyrinth of shell corporations. He had been taking out massive loans against our company's assets, using forged digital signatures, my signatures, to secure them. He had been cooking the books, creating a false reality of steady growth while he was siphoning the lifeblood out of our company. He had diluted my shares through a series of complex, fraudulent transactions I had unknowingly signed off on, leaving me with a worthless minority stake. He hadn't just stolen the money. He had stolen the company itself. He had left behind an empty shell, saddled with so much debt that bankruptcy was the only possible outcome. The final file I found was a copy of the bankruptcy petition, filed that very morning. He had timed it perfectly. The moment the petition was filed, a legal stay would freeze everything, preventing investors and creditors from coming after him directly, while he was already on a plane to a country with no extradition treaty. He had aimed the entire financial cataclysm squarely at me. As the co-founder, the CTO, the other name on all the initial paperwork, I was the one left holding the bag. The one who would have to face the investors, the employees, the banks. The one whose reputation would be shattered beyond repair. I sat there in my beautiful, soundproofed office, staring at the screen, and the world dissolved around me. 20 years of brotherhood, of shared struggle and triumph had been a lie. He wasn't my partner. He wasn't my friend. He was a predator who had spent 2 decades grooming his prey. Every handshake, every late-night conversation, every celebratory drink had been part of an elaborate long con. I had been so focused on building our dream that I never saw he was building his own, a secret escape hatch made from the ruins of my life. The silence was absolute. The city lights began to twinkle outside my window, but I saw nothing. I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness where my trust, my friendship, and my entire world used to be. The king of code had been dethroned, not by a better product or a market shift, but by a simple, ancient act of betrayal. And the worst part, the part that twisted the knife in my gut, was the horrifying realization that I had willingly, smilingly, handed him the weapon to do it. The aftermath was a storm, and I was lashed to the mast of a sinking ship. The first wave to hit was the people. The next morning, I had to walk into our office, into the open-plan space that was always buzzing with creative energy, and face our employees, nearly 200 of them. These were not just employees, they were believers. They were brilliant young minds who had turned down offers from giants in the valley to be a part of our journey. They had trusted us. They had trusted me. Standing before them in the cavernous atrium, with the news of the bankruptcy petition spreading like wildfire, was the most difficult thing I have ever done. I saw the confusion in their eyes turning to fear and then to anger. They asked questions I couldn't answer. Where was he? What happened to the money? Are our jobs safe? What about our stock options, our investments of time and faith that were meant to be our passive income, our future? I had no answers. All I could do was stand there and take it, my own shock and grief buried under an avalanche of collective despair. I was the captain who had steered them onto the rocks, even if my hand wasn't the one on the wheel. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. After that meeting, the office I had co-created, the place that felt more like home than my actual house, became a hostile territory. The friendly greetings were replaced by averted eyes and hushed, bitter whispers. I was a ghost haunting the halls of my own fallen kingdom. The second wave was the lawyers. They descended like sharks sensing blood in the water. There were lawyers for the investors, lawyers for the banks, lawyers for the bankruptcy proceedings. I sat in sterile conference rooms for endless hours, the polished mahogany tables reflecting my own haggard face as they picked apart the carcass of our company. They showed me document after document with my signature on it, perfectly replicated, authorizing loans and transfers that I had no memory of. The financial machinations he had engineered were a work of dark genius. A tangled web of offshore accounts, shell companies, and layered transactions designed to be impenetrable. He had used my trust as his primary weapon, leveraging my deliberate ignorance of the financial side of the business against me. The word debt transformed from a number on a balance sheet into a monstrous, living entity with my name written all over it. The startup's debt, the personal guarantees I had apparently signed, it all became my burden. My personal assets, my savings, everything was tied to the company. It was all gone. My reputation, once my most valuable asset, was incinerated. In the tech world, I was no longer the brilliant innovator. I was either a fool who had been played, or even worse, a co-conspirator who had been double-crossed by his partner. Neither version was employable. The final wave, the one that broke me, came from within the walls of my own home. My wife had at first reacted with a kind of stunned disbelief. She couldn't process the scale of the loss. Our life, our status, our carefully constructed world was built on the foundation of the company's success. As the reality set in, her disbelief curdled into a brittle, terrified anger. She had married a winner, a visionary. She was now married to a failure, a public spectacle of ruin. Our conversations became minefields. Every question about our future, every mention of the budget we now had to live by, was laced with accusation. "How could you let this happen?" she would ask, her voice sharp with a pain I recognized was as much about the loss of her social standing as it was about the money. "I thought you were in charge of the technology, the real value. How could you not know he was building a financial time bomb under our lives?" I tried to explain the depth of the betrayal, the 20 years of trust that he had exploited. But to her, it sounded like an excuse. My blind trust was not a virtue. It was a catastrophic failure of risk management, a dereliction of my duty as a husband and provider. The fabric of our marriage, which I had thought was strong, revealed itself to be woven with the golden threads of our high income. Without it, the whole thing began to unravel. The small comforts that had smoothed over the cracks in our relationship were the first to go. The weekly dinners at high-end restaurants, the spontaneous weekend trips, the casual, extravagant shopping sprees, they were all gone, replaced by mounting bills and the suffocating pressure of our new, terrifying reality. We started fighting about money, something we had never done before. Every credit card charge became a source of conflict. The cavernous, minimalist house, once a source of pride, now felt like a gilded cage, each empty room a testament to the life we had lost. The foreclosure notice was the final blow. Seeing that official letter with its cold, bureaucratic language taped to our custom-designed front door broke something inside her. That night, she didn't yell. She spoke in a low, defeated voice that was far more devastating than any scream. "I can't do this," she said, not looking at me. "I can't live like this. This isn't the life we were supposed to have. It's not the life I signed up for." In her eyes, I no longer saw a partner. I saw a woman looking at a bad investment, a portfolio that had gone to zero, and she was cutting her losses. A week later, she was gone. She packed her things and the children's things while I was out meeting with yet another lawyer. I came home to a house that was unnervingly quiet. A note was left on the kitchen island next to a stack of legal documents, the first volley in what would be a swift and brutal divorce. The note was short and formal. She was staying with her parents. Her lawyer would be in touch. As I stood in the silent kitchen, the sleek, empty monument to a life that was no longer mine, the full weight of my isolation crashed down upon me. My best friend had stolen my past. My wife had just taken my future. I was utterly, completely alone, a bankrupt man in a borrowed house, with nothing left but the echoes of a life I no longer recognized, and a debt so vast it felt like a physical chain around my soul. The storm had passed, and all that was left was the wreckage. The silence in the house after she left was a physical presence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of solitude. It was the dead, sterile silence of a tomb. I would wander through the cavernous rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and see the ghosts of our life everywhere. The faint indentation on the sofa where she used to sit, the empty space in the garage where her car used to be, the crayon marks on a wall in my son's room that I had always meant to paint over. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. I was given 30 days to vacate the property. The bank was ruthlessly efficient. My days became a surreal exercise in deconstruction. I had to sort through 20 years of accumulated life, deciding what was worth keeping, what I could even fit into the small, bleak future that awaited me. Most of it was just stuff. Expensive furniture that belonged to the bank, designer clothes that felt like a costume from another life, gadgets and toys that had lost all their meaning. Packing the children's rooms was the hardest. I held a small, stuffed bear my daughter couldn't sleep without, and a half-finished Lego spaceship my son had been building, and I just broke. I sat on the floor of his empty room, surrounded by the debris of our shattered family, and I wept. It wasn't a quiet, dignified grief. It was a raw, guttural sobbing that came from a place of absolute brokenness. I cried for my children, for the life I had stolen from them. I cried for my wife, for the man she thought she had married. And I cried for the fool I had been, the man who had built a glittering empire on a foundation of sand. When the 30 days were up, I left with 2 suitcases and a single cardboard box filled with old photos and personal papers. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ended up in a cheap, extended-stay motel on the industrial edge of the city, a place of transient souls and quiet desperation. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. The window looked out onto a freeway, the constant roar of traffic a grim soundtrack to my new life. My world had shrunk from a 6,000 square foot architectural marvel to a 200 square foot box. This was the bottom. For weeks, I barely left that room. I lived in a fog of depression and shame. Sleep was a minefield of nightmares where I would relive the betrayal over and over, seeing his smiling face as he handed me the papers that would ruin me. When I was awake, I would stare at the ceiling, my mind a relentless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. What if I had paid more attention? What if I hadn't been so trusting? I dissected every interaction, every conversation we'd had for the past 20 years, searching for the signs I had missed. The truth was they were probably there, but I had been willfully blind, cocooned in my own world of creative focus and intoxicated by our success. The isolation was absolute. My phone never rang. My email inbox was a desert. The business world that had once celebrated me had excommunicated me. I was a leper, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. I tried calling a few people I had considered friends, but the conversations were strained and short. No one wanted to be associated with my spectacular failure. The debt collectors, however, were relentless. They were the only ones who hadn't forgotten me. Their calls were a constant, brutal reminder of the financial crater I was in. I had nothing to give them, no assets left to seize. I was worth more as a liability on their books than as a person. One afternoon, driven by a need for something other than the four walls of my room, I took a bus downtown. I found myself standing across the street from the building that had housed our office. Our company logo was already gone, scrubbed from the glass doors. It was as if we had never existed. I watched people walking in and out, people with purposes, with destinations. I was invisible, a ghost on the sidewalk. I saw a couple walk by, laughing, holding hands. They were young, full of the kind of effortless hope I had once possessed. And in that moment, the full weight of what I had lost, not the money, but the life, the love, the purpose, crashed down on me with such force that I felt my knees buckle. I leaned against a cold, grimy wall, gasping for air, the city noise fading to a dull roar. This was it. This was the absolute nadir. There was nothing left to lose. I had no company, no money, no home, no wife, no friends. My name was worthless. My past was a lie, and my future was a terrifying, empty void. I stayed leaning against that wall for a long time, watching the world go on without me. And then a strange, quiet thought pierced through the fog of my despair. If I had nothing left to lose, then I was also, in a strange way, free. Free from the pressure to succeed, free from the expectations of others, free from the crushing weight of the identity I had so carefully constructed. I was just a man. A man who had made catastrophic mistakes, who had been terribly broken, but who was, against all odds, still breathing. It wasn't a moment of soaring inspiration. It was a tiny, flickering ember in the ashes of my life. It was the first, tentative thought that wasn't about ending things, but about starting over. I had no idea how. I had no idea what that would even look like. But as I pushed myself off that wall and started the long walk back to my grim little room, for the first time in months, I wasn't just looking at the pavement. I was looking ahead. The journey back from rock bottom doesn't begin with a leap. It begins with a single, excruciatingly difficult step. For me, that step was creating a resume. How do you describe a 20-year career that ended in a cataclysmic, headline-grabbing failure? I couldn't list myself as the co-founder and CTO of my own company. That name was radioactive, so I stripped it all away. I became just a senior software architect with 2 decades of experience in system design and back-end development. I omitted names, focusing only on skills and projects. It felt dishonest, but it was a matter of survival. I sent out over 100 applications into the digital void. Most were met with silence. A few led to automated rejection emails. The tech world is small, and my story was too well known. I was toxic. Finally, I got a call. It was from a small, unassuming logistics company, the kind of unglamorous, blue-collar tech firm that the world of venture-backed startups never even acknowledges. They needed someone to help modernize their ancient, creaking inventory management system. The interviewer, a gruff, no-nonsense man in his late 50s, didn't seem to care about my pedigree. He cared about whether I could write clean, efficient code. He gave me a technical test, and as I worked through the problem, something inside me clicked. The familiar, quiet joy of building something, of solving a puzzle, of creating order out of chaos. It was a part of me that the betrayal and the bankruptcy couldn't touch. I got the job. The salary was less than what I used to spend on wine in a month, but it was a paycheck. It was a start. My first day was a lesson in humility. I, who had once commanded a team of 100 engineers in a state-of-the-art office, was now sitting in a drab, fluorescent-lit cubicle, surrounded by people who were more interested in the weekend's football scores than the latest programming frameworks. I wasn't a visionary or a boss. I was just a programmer, a cog in their machine, and it was wonderful. There was a simple, honest clarity to the work. I was given a problem, and I solved it. I was paid for my time and my skill. There were no investors to please, no board meetings, no pressure to change the world. My only responsibility was to make sure that boxes in a warehouse were tracked efficiently. It was grounding. I moved out of the motel and into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. It was sparse, furnished with cheap, second-hand items, but it was mine. I created a budget, a real one this time, written in a notebook. Rent, utilities, groceries, bus fare, every dollar had a purpose. After years of living in a world of abstract, limitless wealth, managing this small, tangible income felt profoundly satisfying. I started to rebuild not a career, but a life. I rediscovered the simple pleasures I had sacrificed at the altar of the startup. I read books, real books made of paper. I took long walks in the park. I started cooking for myself, finding a meditative peace in chopping vegetables and following a recipe. The silence in my small apartment was different from the silence in the mansion. It was a peaceful, restorative solitude, not a haunting emptiness. I had to go through the final stages of the divorce, a process that was mercifully brief and clinical. I gave up any claim to the few assets she had managed to protect. All I asked for was a regular, weekly video call with my children. Seeing them was both painful and healing. They were distant at first, confused by my new, smaller life visible in the background of my screen. I didn't try to explain the complexities of what had happened. I just focused on them. I helped my son with his coding homework, rediscovering my love for teaching. I listened to my daughter talk endlessly about her friends and her art projects. Slowly, the wall between us began to crumble. They began to see me not as the failed CEO or the absent, workaholic father, but just as their dad. One evening, out of morbid curiosity, I did an internet search for my old partner's name. I found a few articles. He had been spotted in a tropical paradise, living a life of opulent leisure. For a moment, the old, familiar rage flared up inside me, the injustice of it all. But then, as I looked at the picture of him on a yacht with a forced, empty smile on his face, I felt something else: pity. He was a man on the run, not just from the law, but from himself. He had built his paradise on a foundation of lies, and he would have to live forever with the knowledge of what he had done, always looking over his shoulder. He had stolen my money, but I was the one who was truly free. I closed the laptop. He no longer had any power over me. My life is small now, and I wouldn't trade it. My wealth isn't measured in shares or market capitalization, but in my peace of mind. My income isn't passive, it's earned every single day through honest work. My greatest investment is the tentative, growing bond with my children. I lost everything I thought defined me: my company, my wealth, my status, my marriage. But in the rubble, I found a man I had forgotten existed, a man who finds joy not in the spectacular view from the top, but in the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, one line of code, one simple day at a time. I was betrayed and left with nothing, but in a way, that betrayal gave me back everything that truly matters. Thank you for being here. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far our community reaches. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.